Homelessness is a pervasive problem all throughout the nation. Hawaii was at times placed as having the greatest homeless population per capita in the nation for many years. Today, we fall second to New York. Understanding and researching the biopsychosocial-spiritual model of our state of Hawaii's homeless epidemic will help to unravel the challenges that the homeless population faces as individuals, communities, and as a society. Various dynamics contribute to Oahu's socioeconomic epidemic regarding homelessness. There are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual factors that all play a role in contributing to the homeless population that is often overlooked and misunderstood. Looking through the lenses of those who have experienced homelessness, we want to also search and uncover the ways that homelessness affects an individual biologically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. Without exploring these factors in depth, solutions to this island-wide epidemic will often never reach its full potential.
Hi there, this is Christy Lavoie, and I'm going to briefly talk about the biological component of the BPSS model and how it relates to our chosen minority population, which is the homeless community. Now, when we're taking a look at the biological dimension, what we're really wanting to take a closer look at is what is the biological impact on being homeless. So in other words, how do situations such as prolonged stress, exposure to the elements, nutritional deficiencies, how do all of these things impact an individual biologically? Before getting into more details, I just wanted to mention a quick fact, and it was reported in 2013 that most deaths of the homeless each year are mainly due to cancer, heart attacks, and diabetes. Now, this disheartening information is not surprising considering some of those key contributors I just mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and just take a closer look at some of these key components to get a better understanding of some of the challenges that the homeless population face day in and day out. Main concerns when it comes to homelessness. Okay, so the first impact that I wanted to talk about today is going to be acute and chronic illness on the homeless population. When examining the relationship between illnesses and homelessness, it has been found that illness can either precede and contribute to homelessness, develop as a result of being homeless, or oftentimes require complicated treatment that the homeless typically do not have access to proper care. Just a few common health problems to consider within this community. It's certainly not an all-inclusive list here, but namely malnutrition is huge within the homeless community. As you can imagine, these individuals don't often have access to foods that are high in nutrients and vitamins that we need in order to sustain and maintain our well-being. As an example, a homeless man or woman may be offered, say, a sandwich from a passerby from a local fast food restaurant, and that might be all that they have to eat for that day and then remaining few days after that. Eating that way over a long period of time, coupled with foods that are high in preservatives such as canned goods, they are often easily to access and they're cheap, but the downfall of that is eating foods that are high in preservatives over a long period of time is going to have detrimental impacts to your system and overall your nutrition. Musculoskeletal disorders is another big one. We're thinking about that. We're thinking of homeless individuals who don't have a place to sleep. So you often see that they sleep on benches or on sidewalks. And the result of that is over a long period of time, their body is going to break down. So you may see onset of a gait, so an individual might walk with a gait as a result of not having a supportive place to sleep over many years. Premature arthritis is another big one as well. Venereal diseases is pretty self-explanatory, and then hepatitis is also huge within the homeless community because substance abuse is prevalent, and with that there's often the sharing of IVs or needles, and that's going to spread diseases such as hepatitis. Another devastating biological impact to discuss today is the concept of rapid aging among the homeless population. Researchers have found that homeless people in their 50s actually suffer from more geriatric conditions than those who are decades older but have a roof over their heads. This is often because homeless individuals face challenging living conditions and endure a variety of complex interplay of health and social deprivation. These challenges then lead to high rates of early mortality when compared to the general population. Now, while we may know that the homeless do tend to have more health problems than those who are not, it was shocking for me to find that the life expectancy is actually 25 to 30 years less for the homeless when compared to non-homeless counterparts. In fact, one study concluded the average death of a homeless male is just 50 years old, with the average being 52 for a female. Another biological impact that I think is super important to talk about is the concept of toxic stress, especially within the child homeless population. Although it is a well-known fact that chronic stress over long periods of time is going to lead to detrimental impacts within a person's neurological functioning, their brain functioning, their, adverse changes that take place. These changes are especially prevalent within the child population due to the unique place that they're at within their development. So for toxic stress in homeless children, it's especially prevalent because these individuals often don't have access to their families, institutions such as schools or healthcare. So with that, those high levels of cortisol that remain within their system for long periods of time are going to ultimately alter their brain functioning and have implications for their neurological functioning as well. So if you think about it, for an example, as a child, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from for an extended amount of time, not knowing what the weather is going to bring that day and how it's going to impact your day or your well-being, and then not knowing if you're going to be subjected to sexual or physical violence that day. All of this creates those high levels of cortisol, and over a long period of time, you're going to see some adverse impacts that are quite devastating. So as we know, there are many things that could ultimately lead an individual to a life on the streets, including sickness such as cancers and other illnesses or ailments. But one interesting link that I wanted to mention is the link between substance abuse and homelessness. As it has been found, there is a correlation between genes and addictive behavior. So when we look at this from a different lens, it is quite possible that the genetic predisposition to addiction can then increase the likelihood of substance abuse and ultimately lead to homelessness.
This is Abigail Eli, and I'm going to be talking about the psychological impact and how it affects our homeless population. According to Hawaii News Now, as of April 2023, the Institute for Human Services discussed the results of a survey regarding the homeless population living on the island of Oahu's North Shore District. These results showed that 60% of those who were homeless in the North Shore area were suffering from some form of mental illness. Mental illness definitely has a very wide and broad spectrum of different disorders that are prevalent among our Hawaii's homeless communities. Disorders such as general anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, alcohol use disorder, methamphetamine use disorder. In fact, any substances is found to be a psychological disorder. There's so many different disorders that are affecting our homeless population here in the state of Hawaii. The 2023 Point in Time Count Comprehensive Report was published in May of 2023. This report is something that's done annually, and they try to get a count of how much homeless are on the streets on any given night, and they do it on one particular evening in January, where they go and have different people who will count as many homeless as they can at the same time. But the results of this report really do reflect the seriousness of the psychological issues facing our unhoused and unsheltered population on the island of Oahu. According to the 2023 PIT report, 39% of the homeless population surveyed were found to have mental illness. 11% of those were veterans. 31% had substance use problems. There are many psychological disorders that actually cause someone to become homeless, such as schizophrenia, dementia, post-traumatic stress disorder. Even the anxiety and depression can cause a person to become homeless. And then, of course, there's the substance use disorders and many other psychological disorders that could cause a person to become homeless, such as like dementia. Uh, Dementia, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, you can find many of those who have this disorder wandering the streets of Oahu. And because Medicaid and Medicare cannot provide housing options through medical care for a person who is able to provide for their basic needs, such as, they're able to feed themselves, bathe, and, they can dress themselves. And if they have decent mobility where they're able to walk, Medicaid does not pay for that person to be cared for, to be put into a care home. So if they don't have someone that will, like a family member that's willing to support them and take care of them, those particular people will be found wandering the streets. I actually care for an elderly woman who doesn't have any family, and she has dementia. And she was found wandering the streets, falling. And although she had a home at the time, she did not know how to get back to it. And she didn't remember, when she was supposed to be somewhere. So she was just sometimes 30 years before in her mind. And so she was found wandering the streets thinking that she's working when she's been retired a long time. And so that was super dangerous for her. And because of the dementia, she wouldn't remember to pay her bills. And so she was potentially on her way to becoming homeless, and there would have been no one to care for her. And when we tried to get her the help that she needed, there was nothing that was able, that in the medical world, that was able to support her or to help her to get into a care home. So this is a problem where we're going to find people with that kind of psychological disorders wandering our streets and becoming homeless. We also have, those who are veterans who have major PTSD because of the trauma that they experienced in war. And similarly, those who have depression or those who have general anxiety disorders or other things like schizophrenia can be found homeless. But one of the things is that they will continue to be homeless if they have these disorders, because they often struggle to keep their appointments or don't remember when their appointments are. They tend to lose their paperwork because they can't remember where they put it. And so they will find that they won't be able to keep up with the housing or, job employment and things, and just regular applications for Social Security or a steady income or food stamps. Many of those things are going to fall to the wayside just because of these psychological disorders that are left untreated. So without confronting these major issues of mental illness, Oahu will continue to see a rise of this homeless population because it only further traumatizes an individual into a cycle of chronic homelessness. So it just keeps on cycling from the fact that it maybe caused them to become homeless, but it keeps them in the cycle of continuing to be homeless.
Hi everyone, this is Alana, and I'll be doing the social component of the BPSS model. Hawaii has an ongoing social issue of homelessness that impacts a very diverse population. According to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in 2019, it was reported that Hawaii had the second highest rate of homelessness in the nation. 44.9% in every 10,000 Hawaiians are homeless as of 2019. Some key factors regarding the social issues of homelessness are neglect, not feeling accepted, kids falling behind or not going to school because of the lack of resources, sleep, and discrimination inside the classroom. Social issues regarding adults, including having a hard time getting a job or holding a job because of the lack of resources, no transportation, or no address to put down on applications. Other factors may be veterans having a hard time adjusting to the world after serving, people experiencing mental health issues, single parents are having a hard time supporting themselves and their children, yet it all draws back to one thing that America is so fixated on: money. Losing social connections can make homelessness harder to deal with. In addition to other adversities that homeless people face, many of those individuals face social isolation due to the fact that most of society ignores them and denies their humanity. Social issues of homelessness. Children. Put aside everything you think you know about homelessness. Most homeless aren't panhandlers. About 1.6 million of them each year are children. Children growing up in poverty face daily hardships and difficult living conditions. The stress of living in poverty can majorly impact a child's brain development and can have long-term effects on their physical and mental health. These effects then follow them into adulthood, and that is when the cycle of generational poverty continues. Social effects on children and young adults. Health. Children and young adults who are experiencing homelessness are more likely to have greater health problems and are more likely to suffer from diseases due to the lack of proper treatment. Poor health results in children staying home from school for weeks, holding them back in the education system. Without stable living conditions or finances, it takes a bunch of steps to get that type of care. According to Hawaii laws, unaccompanied minors who are at least 14 years of age would be able to qualify to sign up for medical care without a parent or guardian's consent. However, without their consent, it would make them responsible for any coverage plans or costs. But ask yourselves, what minor would have that type of knowledge to do that? I have 5 cousins whose parents are currently living on the beach, experiencing homelessness and substance abuse. Both my grandma and my mom took in my 5 cousins because they witnessed them, who were all underage at the time, struggling and living in conditions that no other children should be living in. They didn't know how to receive or sign up for medical care because they had no prior knowledge about it. They had no food, they barely had any clothes, and they couldn't even get to school because they had no money or any ways to get there. Social effects on children and young adults in the classroom. The problem of education and homelessness isn't a matter of inadequate education systems. The problem is the lack of resources and support in the communities that children fail to attend school, fall behind, and potentially drop out. Education is essential for children to acquire the tools they need to break out of the cycle of poverty for themselves and for their families. But how can they do that when society creates such a negative effect on homelessness? We tend to see a lot of these children put out there or on the spot for their living situations, the way they dress, their hygiene, and so much more. But what they don't realize is that the children who are experiencing homelessness don't have the access to resources or home security or even the privilege to have certain things like other children do. Maybe some often don't think about it as much, but there's a few that will start to get judgmental towards their fellow students or classmates, not realizing how much it takes a toll on them. Education should be a way to escape financial security and housing stability. However, accessing education is more difficult when you don't have those things. Some can't come to school because they have no transportation. Some won't come to school because they are being discriminated against. Others won't come because they may not have the school supplies or the resources. And some stop coming because they feel like there is no support or there's no hope for them. There are so many things that play a factor in children who experience homelessness and don't come to school. Social effects on children and young adults outside the classroom. Homelessness also makes families and children more vulnerable to other forms of trauma, such as physical and sexual assault, witnessing violence, or substance abuse. Half of school-age children experience anxiety, depression, or withdrawal. An aunt of mine and her husband took in his brother's children from Washington. My aunt's husband is disabled and he can't walk, so my aunt is the only working one in their household. However, they both flew up from Oahu to Washington to take my uncle's brother's two daughters who were living in a drug house with their biological mother and her boyfriend. To this day, I can remember exactly how it was like when they came back home and when we met them for the first time. These girls were both 1 and 3 years old at the time. I remember when they walked in that front door, we all tried to give them a warm welcoming with open arms, and they were both just scared. They looked at us like, who are these people? And they didn't like to be touched, and they weren't comfortable around us. So afterwards, my aunt and uncle sat down with us, explaining to us all of the horrific things that these two girls had to endure. Their mom was only a teenager at the time when she had these girls. She was in multiple relationships that were all domestic violence. She was exposed to drugs and different substances. Her current boyfriend was a drug dealer. So her two daughters witnessed and were exposed to all of that. They were both assaulted physically and sexually, and they were in and out of different homes. And they just experienced so many things that no kid should. It took almost a year for them to be able to trust us, to be comfortable around us, or to be able to even talk to us and just feel comfortable. In that time, we had to teach them what it was like, or what it was to be loved and to love. We had to teach them boundaries. We had to teach them that eating and drinking was important for them because I guess they didn't like to eat and it seemed as if they were scared to eat. We also had to learn everything about them, what they were comfortable with, what they liked or disliked, and we had to adjust to their needs as well. The saying, it takes a village to raise a child, is what we pretty much used to try and raise them. Social issues of homelessness, adults. Here in America, and more specifically in Hawaii, it is tolerated to have people living out on the streets. Although it is true that some people choose to live that way, for those that don't choose to live that way, they are ignored and judged. Not all homeless people are substance users, and not all of them are lazy. Of course, you have a few here and there that are those things, but many of them are veterans who find it hard to adjust to the world after war. Many of them have hard lives and are past their breaking point. Many of them experience mental health issues, and a lot are single parents who couldn't or can't make ends meet. But yet, who are the ones there to help those in need? Social effects on adults. Health. According to Governor Josh Green, he says that he has a plan to address homelessness in Hawaii. Homelessness exposes people to greater risk of injury and infection. It also makes existing mental health issues and addiction worse. According to the Department of Human Services, there are homeless programs here in Hawaii, and there are homeless shelters for those at risk of becoming homeless. There's also medical and other types of expenses that can help. But yet, even with all of those resources, how much of them know the first step to take in order to get that help? Some are scared or worried to do that just because of how they are looked at. Some aren't capable of seeking help because of the issues that they already face. Social effects on adults, education, and work. Without social support systems, adults are having a hard time getting a job or holding a job. Hawaii's overall unemployment rate is around 3.2% year round, and 10.4% are in the Waianae area alone. So why do 10% fail to have jobs? Some just don't have the education or the experience. Here in Hawaii, in order to get what is a good job, you have to have an education. And some of the people that experience homelessness can't because of what they go through. Some face mental illnesses or substance abuse. Some of them have criminal backgrounds. Um, Being homeless, you don't have a stable house, which means you can't put down on applications that you have an address. Um, Others don't have their IDs or can get their IDs. While being homeless, there's a lot of people that either steal their stuff or it can get misplaced. So it's hard for them as people to apply for jobs because of their living situations and conditions. Um, and then when applying for jobs, they're judged and looked at because of how they're dressed, or they only have a bag to fit everything that they have or that they need. And employers don't really like that. So a lot of them tend to just be scared to seek help because they don't want to be judged for their living conditions, or they don't want to be denied because of their living conditions.
Hello, this is Esteban Doria. I'm completing the spiritual component of the BPSS model. The Biopsychosocial-spiritual model and ethics is a modern humanistic and holistic approach to better view and understand a human individual. According to the World Health Organization, they once stated that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Along with the physical, mental, social wellness of the individual also encompasses the spirituality, which completes all aspects of wellness and overall well-being for an individual. The spiritual and health can also be defined as the search for ultimate meaning, purpose, and significance in relation to one's self, family, others, community, nature, and the sacred, expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. Now, what I really wanted to express was the spirituality through religion affiliation in America. It's a vital interpretation and perspective that most people do not tend to take into consideration when thinking how important spirituality is to an individual. Now, I have gone and done some research, and as you can see, um, people who identify as Christian make up 70.6% of the American population, and this study did survey um, roughly around 30,000 people or so, probably more, and that is a pretty good indication of how you can describe what America looks like in terms of growing up in religious households. You also see that other religions comprise at just nearly 6%, at 5.9%. That included Jewish, Muslims, Buddhist, Hindu, and other religious faiths. While the other half of 22.8% really was just considered themselves atheist or agnostic. There's always going to be a wide variety of individuals who will identify with some religion or not, but that doesn't mean that they weren't raised with some sort of religious understanding background or were spiritual themselves at some point in their lives. So this is a good foundation understanding that when we look at the homeless population, whether they're agnostic or atheist, that's the likelihood that they were raised in a Christian household or um, with the understanding of what religion and Christianity is very high, especially if they at one point were spiritual in themselves. You could understand that this translate and moves with them wherever they go, even them as a homeless individual. There's a very important aspect of individual need that I observe and usually tend to use with people that I've worked with in the past. What I noticed that what people's basic needs are based off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They start with the physiological needs, and those things include air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, but that follows into safety. The safety includes the personal security, someone's employment, their resources, what they have, their overall health, their property. These are the important things that people use for safety. Now, on top of that, excuse me, you have love and belonging. It's another type of need that we have as human beings, which include friendship, community, intimacy, family, a sense of connection, followed by esteem, which is the one self-respect, respect for others, the self-esteem, the status of recognition, individual strength, individual sense of freedom. And last is self-actualization, and that is the actual desire to become the most that one can actually be or become in the future, work towards taking steps and becoming a stronger person or someone mentally sound. I think that when you introduce these things to people who are homeless, who have mental health, some sort of disorder, have been diagnosed with some mental health disorder, you realize that somewhere in between Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're missing large portions of these categories. They could be missing one to all five, but this is a factor to understanding why they are in the predicament that they're in, whether they have family support, whether they don't have the self-esteem, or they have some sort of trauma that is related to these categories. It's very important to understand that just giving them the basic needs, their needs, and meeting those needs absolutely makes the biggest of difference in how they see themselves, they perceive themselves, and perceive the public, and overall you hope that they actually want to get the help that they deserve. The previous slide discussed Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When understanding this slide, just looking at the plain pictures, I think they speak volumes. I added this to add some sort of context and substance to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You tend to see so many different types of environments and individuals. In the top pictures, you get to see what loneliness looks like for someone who is homeless and it has mental health. They tend to deal with it alone by themselves without the assistance of others. And if they do congregate with others, they tend to only be there for the resource that they need, which is usually um, drug or some sort of substance use, right? That's their community. They don't have friends, they have acquaintances. You know, you tell them, you ask them, where did you sleep last night? And if they didn't sleep on the street or by themselves under a tree or in a tent, they tend to just claim that they've been couch surfing. You ask them, who are these people to you? And they'll tell you, oh no, it's usually a trap house. There's a lot of us in the house that are just kind of couch surfing per se. But then you see the very top right picture. You see that environment. This is very common in many metropolitan cities where you have an environment where it's very dirty, it's cluttered, it's unhygienic. But this is the norm. Unfortunately, this is the kind of environment that someone who is missing a lot of those needs kind of tend to resort to and tend to lay their head at night. Um, but the pictures at the bottom, we have to remember that a lot of these individuals still seek God, still seek religion, still seek spirituality, their own internal drive for spirituality. And we can't forget that that is driven by the community. That is driven by the perception that the community have for the perception for the need that they have. Excuse me, whether it's food, whether it's a simple conversation, or hello, how are you doing today? But it could be shelter. It could be the things that usually church and church facilities tend to offer to the homeless, and that tends to build trust with the community and just religion itself, right? It helps them build who they are internally, and you hope that middle picture you see is what they lean on, resort to, is God, trying to seek a higher level of spirituality to transcend their current status, to seek something better. But this is very crucial to understand, is the community really does play a major role in their lives. This slide is very basic and very simple as well. In understanding the perception that homeless people go through, a lot of people tend to walk by them, ignore them, or think that they're disgusting. I know that I've gone through experimental training in my employment, and I've seen the perception that people give towards mental health. And then I've seen the perception people give law enforcement officers and military, or someone who's dealing with cancer. And you tend to have these perceptions that sway to either hero or the opposite way. People feel disgusted. And though they might not use the word disgusted or disgust, you tend to have words that are more tweaker, lonely, depressed, mental health, dirty, and they all just build a perception. And instead of having a level of kindness to change that perception, I think many people tend to ignore it. Many people don't make it a problem or don't want to be a part of that problem unless they are already that part of the problem or a victim of some sort of crime or violence towards them. But I think kindness, just as I discussed with religious institutions, it goes a long way. And I think people really need to move forward and start helping, start being a little more empathetic and sympathetic towards individuals who they may have perceived in the past as, you know, that's their choice, when in reality that's not their choice. It is something that's driven in their mental health. Mental health in search of spirituality. It's vital and important to understand that the problem in the U.S. overall, when it comes to homelessness, it's only growing. You could see in the graph that I've illustrated to the left that there's roughly 1,750,000 people who are homeless in the U.S. today. That number obviously can sway up and down, and we hope that it's decreasing. But you also have to understand that these individuals, they don't just live homeless and out of sight. Many of them have mental health disorders. Many of them have substance and alcohol abuse issues on top of their mental health. And along with these complications comes a level of crime. Not because they want to commit the crime, but there's a driving force behind the committing a crime. And yes, mental health. And like I stated, the combination of alcohol and drugs, whether it's fentanyl, meth, heroin, even the use of marijuana, can impact and change and influence someone's mental state into thinking, well, where can I get my next high? How do I get the funds to buy more drugs? If I'm not getting mental health treatment, then what am I going to do in the streets? And people just don't sleep like they think. They get high and sleep. So this is a very important tool or a graph in illustrating the amount of people who are in prison based on their crimes, based on the homelessness problem, based on them having a mental health disorder. It's critical to understand that they're all correlated. I have vast experience working with individuals who are homeless, people who have been under the jurisdiction of the courts or the Department of Corrections, were in prison or are in jail. And I often meet people who tell me they would rather be in jail or prison for multiple reasons. They can get the treatment that they require, whether it's methadone or Suboxone. It's a mental health treatment. It's shelter. It's food three times a day. It's warmth in the winter. But overall, a lot of people don't also want to leave these institutions because they know that when they are back on the street, they're going to resort to the lifestyle they had prior to being incarcerated in any sense or in any level. And this kind of just brought back a quote that I had recently read by Dow Constantine, a King County executive here in the state of Washington, where he offered sympathy and empathy by stating, if I have the opportunity to ensure a warm, safe place for even one additional person, I have the moral obligation to act, and I will. That's the perspective and phrasing of someone who's a high-ranking member within this community, with King County itself, which houses in Seattle, houses a lot of mental health individuals with mental health diagnosis and are homeless. Most of our population jails are those individuals committing, um, assaults or property crime, and for the most part, they're trying to gain financial advantages so that they can continue their drug use. But a lot of these individuals, once they are achieving some sort of, or they're breaching a level of their normal baseline, you would assume and hope, you kind of get to see in a different person of who they are, who they were before, um, the fentanyl took over their mental state. But it's not just Constantine. It's also the programs that you get nationwide throughout the U.S. where there are jails and prisons who cooperate with universities or junior colleges and other religious institutions. They come in together and they work as a collaborative force to assist the homeless and the incarcerated individuals with religious services. They help with improving their spirituality, their knowledge with Bible study and the Bible itself. But they also offer educational opportunities. And a lot of these institutions do offer bachelor's and master's degrees in religious studies or religious ministry. And that ultimately does help create change with someone who otherwise not having this would feel stuck, and they can't pull themselves out of that hole, which is drug addiction and mental health. But on top of that, they offer mental health treatment and medications. You got psychologists, social workers, case managers, psychiatrists, psych nurses, and psych doctors. It takes a village, is what I like to say. But when they apply these medications and techniques and strategies, you need that person to actually buy in and want to change. And for the most part, they do, because they know that their life prior to being on drugs was a whole lot better than them on the streets on drugs. It's just a terrible combination, especially when you mix in their trauma and their mental health states. There are several things that homeless individuals seek, and when they have nothing else in their lives, the only thing that they will demand is respect and dignity. When you empower someone by giving them the respect and dignity that they deserve, and you are adding the services previously mentioned, you increase their self-confidence, their self-worth, their spirituality, their drive for more and to move forward, upwards and onwards. Um, these are critical things that us human beings need to give to them. But I do want to state a couple quotes that reflect what dignity and respect is to human beings. This is a quote by Franklin D. Roosevelt, which states, "Religion, by teaching man his relationship to God, gives the individual a sense of his own dignity and teaches him to respect himself by respecting his neighbors." This quote couldn't be more accurate to the homelessness and the problem in homelessness that we deal with every day. When they are our neighbors, we walk down the street, and like I previously said, they'll sleep by our house, they'll sleep in tents, they'll sleep under bridges, but no matter what, they are our neighbors. We walk by them almost every day, and if you're not aware, you will ignore them. That lack of acknowledgement is a type of perceiving perspective that they understand that they might not be at a level that is the person that walks in front of them. But giving them the respect, telling them how are you, helping them where you can, spreading the word of God, trying to get them to their mental health treatment. It's all encompassing to their better health. Another quote or verse that I've taken from the Bible is, "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Matthew chapter 25, verse 35 through 36. Absolutely defines and explains what we should be doing to improve someone's spirituality when they are needing that help. Extend that hand, be positive towards them, encourage them, provide them the shelter, provide them the resources they need. This is what we do as therapists. This is what we do as professionals. This is what we should do as normal human beings to other human beings.
When examining the biopsychosocial-spiritual model to another framework, I decided to take a closer look at the biomedical model and how it relates or differs to the BPSS framework that we talked about today. In fact, the biopsychosocial-spiritual model was actually derived from the biomedical model because this model was often looked at in traditional medicine. So, for example, a practitioner who focuses on the biomedical model may see a patient and only focus on environmental or internal causes or impacts related to any ailments or issues that they may be experiencing. With this framework, the mind and body are said to function independently. And although it is recognized that there are psychological consequences to a particular ailment or issue, it's not recognized that there could be psychological causes of illness or a certain circumstance. With this, there's also usually very little recognition of the whole person. And comparing that to the biopsychosocial-spiritual model, as we just learned, it looks at a combination of factors, the bio, psycho, social, and spiritual causes or impacts. The mind and body are also connected, and it is said that illnesses and circumstances may have psychological causes and consequences. This is going to be more of a holistic approach. And when we're looking at these two models side by side, for obvious reasons, the BPSS model is definitely going to be the best way forward in developing the most comprehensive solutions for the homeless population, because we've learned there are so many more aspects to homelessness, more so than just environmental impacts or factors.
Ethics and counseling. The American Counseling Association Code of Ethics sets the standard for professionals and counselors with the purpose of protecting the dignity and well-being of clients. Principles within the ACA Code of Ethics include the promotion of autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, and fidelity. These are critical to performing your job and ensuring that you build this alliance, this therapeutic alliance with your clients and people you work with, or people you walk by, or people you talk to every day, and in particular the homeless population, who are lacking a lot of this from the general public. So us as professionals, we need to adhere to a higher standard and must present ourselves to that standard always, and to create better bonds and hopefully to create change through therapy. A very critical technique or therapeutic technique that I am fascinated by is a higher advanced level of CBT, which is called the dialectical behavioral therapy. It is a type of talk therapy, a psychotherapy. It's specifically adapted for people who experience emotions very intensely. Dialectical means to combine opposite ideas. DBT focuses on helping people accept the reality of their lives and their behaviors, as well as helping them learn to change their lives, including their unhelpful behaviors. Now, where do you, and why, and how do you use DBT? Well, it's critical to use on individuals who are expressing or have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, who express self-harm or commit self-harm, who have suicidal ideation, suicidal behaviors, or may have had suicidal attempts in the past, with individuals who have PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of homeless tend to be substance use users. So someone who has substance use disorder, eating disorder, specifically binge eating disorder or bulimia, and just to use just the observation of depression and anxiety. Those are very important categories in which you use DBT. Now, the main goal of DBT is for therapists to use it is to strike a balance between validation or acceptance of who you are and your challenges and the benefits of that change. When working and dealing with the homeless population, yeah, you have to understand that there are many barriers, many uphill roadblocks that encompass what their struggles are. Many of them are indeed self-imposed. Maybe not their fault. Maybe it's their mental health status that day. Maybe it's influenced by a family member, a friend, or an acquaintance, or it's just probably drug use itself. But some blame and ethics can be due to the provider, the therapeutic provider that they may see. They can encounter barriers from them too. And some of the barriers you often see, a combination of both self-imposed and from providers, are the fact that homeless people or individuals who are homeless will tend to have a lower willingness to attend scheduled counseling sessions. It may be due to their own perspective of I'm okay, I don't need this, I'm fine the way I am, or maybe they're just not accepting of the need for therapy. Some experience limited, resources or sources in transportation. Homeless individuals tend to be very transient. How they get to one place or another is a mystery. When I was a probation officer, we'd talk about that a lot and saying, hey, if you can get there, you can get here. But that's not always the case. Their transportation can be an issue, especially if they need to go to the Social Security office, which is across town, or maybe they're couch surfing on the other side of town, or their resource, their shelter at some gospel mission is in a different county. They have to get to all these places and they don't have the money or the resources to get there. A lot of individuals also are active drug users and they tend to stick around those areas where it's easily accessible. Sometimes they do go to areas where they get the treatment, whether it's methadone or Suboxone. But for the most part, they stick to an environment where they're most comfortable. And it tends to be in environments where they can acquire the drugs, they can acquire money or resources to purchase drugs, whether it's property crimes, breaking into cars, stealing purses, or, you know, God knows there's tons of different ways. But those are self-imposed. Now, I like to think that some providers are very limited in, not limited, but strict in their policies. You know, when someone comes into a facility, they're told they can be in these outpatient therapeutic settings, but they must refrain from using drugs. They can't use alcohol, and that's the problem itself. Is they show up. Sometimes, if they're court mandated, they will perform um, urine analysis or breathalyzers, and if they fail to meet that standard, then they get discharged unsuccessfully. It's absolutely counterproductive to the ethics that one professional should have in providing the treatment that they deserve and need. That's actually hurting them, hurting the community, hurting everyone surrounding them. Could be their family, their friends, and yes, those acquaintances as well. Also, a lack of engagement in therapeutic treatment plan. I think that a lot of homeless, even if they accept it, they don't want to abide by the treatment, the homework per se of having to change, and it's just another obligation. It's another hoop they have to jump through when they're already comfortable in their own skin, or at least they portray to be. But failing to balance the mental health treatment and in conjunction with their barriers can increase the crime rate, can increase their substance use, and unfortunately can increase the probability of suicide. In Hawaii, the government created the assisted community treatment law.
One of the great areas that we covered when we were studying the homeless population is is in this area where in 2014 Oahu had passed the assisted community treatment law, which was amended in 2019, and then it was amended again in 2023. This law was created to allow the homeless who are severely mentally ill to be given medical treatment, regardless of whether they agreed to it or not. So, just in short, what it basically is saying that those who are so mentally ill that they are not able to make decisions for their own benefit. It could be homeless that maybe are lying in their own feces, and really just don't have the ability to say, "Hey, I need, you know, better care. I can't make these decisions on my own." Then psychologists or doctors can recommend them to the courts to have a guardian ad litem appointed to them. But it's a really long process. It is not that easy. There are not that many people that have qualified for this because of the kind of wording in this law. But it's basically it's a benefit to the state, because it lowers the cost for EMS transportation, hospital emergency room care visits, um, and it really helps the person as well to get the better medical treatment. Now, some people might say it's wrong to force a person to have to get medical care. So the way this law works is that whether this person refuses treatment, like say, getting psychoanalytic medications, a person who is maybe not mentally capable of making those decisions might deny it. But with this, with a court appointing a guardian ad litem, they are not allowed. Basically, their rights are stripped away, and they can force them to take the medication, and someone else can be that support to make sure that they get the help that they need. Now, some people might say, hey, that's terrible, that's not ethical, that you're forcing that on them. And as from a psychologist standpoint, it's like, here we have, from the ethical standpoint, that we would not do any harm to our patients or to our clients, and so would it be wrong for us to continue to let them to live in their feces? And I love what the article in Hawaii News Now spoke on. It talked about how is it more wrong for us to allow them to live in their feces, where they're getting all kinds of infections, to where a lot of them are getting amputations, because we're all just turning a blind eye to it. So it can be a gray area. It's like, is it ethical or not ethical for us to get involved and make sure that that person is no longer able to cause harm to themselves in this way because of their mental state? Reflecting on everything that we have researched and presented, it is evident that studying every aspect of the biopsychosocial spiritual model is really crucial to understanding what the homeless population is enduring. Without this clear perspective of the challenges a homeless individual faces, it's really difficult to effectively treat that client that has to live in these kinds of different environments. Anyway, without understanding, there will be no sympathy, and definitely we're never going to have empathy. We've got to take a hard look at all that we've discussed above if we are going to be effective psychologists. These are the many of the issues that they face every day. Like, so biologically, just when we look at this picture, we can see that there are certain things that they have to endure, that can really affect their lives. One of the things that the homeless have to endure biologically, that affects their biological aspect, is that they are found to age at a more rapid speed. um a lot of times it's because they fall into substance abuse, and they're more likely to suffer with detrimental and acute and chronic illnesses. On top of that, without the appropriate support, mental health issues go unchecked, and that too leads to homelessness. Unfortunately, the life expectancy of the homeless population is decades less than their counterparts. From the psychological aspect, as we spoke of before, issues like depression, anxiety disorders, PTSD, dementia, and so many other psychological disorders, they all have been they have had an impact in causing homelessness, but they have also had a major impact in causing the cycle of homelessness to continue, where it is very difficult to break out of homelessness. Psychological disorders are often playing a part in chronic unemployment and educational absenteeism. It plays a part in appointment instability, and it plays a part in social isolation. Substance abuse is often used to cope with psychological distress that also adds to the continued patterns a homeless individual can get stuck in. Socially, the homeless are definitely affected, and things like neglect, not feeling accepted, the kids falling behind or not going to school because the lack of resources, not even able to get a proper amount of sleep, and the discrimination inside the classroom. Adults, they suffer socially as well through struggling to find or hold employment because of the lack of resources, the fact that they're not having great transportation, or that they don't have an address to put down for applications. Single parents, they're going to struggle to support themselves while caring for their children simultaneously. There are so many different social aspects that are affecting our homeless population. Interestingly enough, the homeless, as we spoke of earlier, are also affected spiritually because many of the homeless are depending on charities or religious institutions to help them meet their daily needs. Things like soup kitchens and places that provide or charities that provide hygiene, shelter, solitude, prayer. They're often sought out. Oftentimes, religious organizations offer programs to help overcome controlled substances, addictions. So they have all kinds of programs that help the homeless population to overcome addictions. They offer resources for mental health help and then employment or housing opportunities. A lot of times, though, because the homeless are feeling embarrassed or because they don't have the greatest hygiene or they have a criminal history, they're afraid of being judged, the perception of being judged. Many of the homeless will reject any notion of association with someone based on their homeless status. So they may not reach out for the help that is needed, even if they are allowed to go to the churches. Many of them will feel like I'm not able to do that or I'm not worthy to do that. The perceptions people have of the homeless as being criminals or substance users often cause the homeless to isolate themselves from continuing active spiritual pursuits.
When taking into account everything that we've learned throughout this project and presentation as it pertains to the homeless population and the unique challenges and the detrimental impacts and overall the tragic conditions that they're faced with every day, I think it's really important when we're looking at recommendations for future action that we are really focusing on the development of integrated, easily accessible, and low barrier on demand medical, mental health, substance abuse delivery programs. A more team-centered approach would be ideal. Evidence-based medical, mental health, and substance abuse treatment would be provided while strengthening the linkages between public and private organizations. All of this while still taking into account any cultural barriers that might be in place with access to care. So overall, we're looking at more of a multidisciplinary, holistic care coordination and tailor that to the needs who are experiencing homelessness. With this, there is promise in improving the health of the population.
When it comes to ethically treating our patients, one must wonder how the research that is being holistically approached will change the structure of psychology as we know it. We have progressed past Freud's psychoanalytic approach, surpassed Eisenach's biological approach, gone beyond Maslow's humanistic approach, and the many other psychologists who focused on one aspect in treating their clients psychologically. With all that we are researching and coming to understand, I would love to see how taking a biopsychosocial-spiritual approach might enlighten the world of psychology to see beyond just the one aspect affecting a person's life, but how there are many different aspects that have influenced their patterns, behaviors, choices, and personalities. Will it make us better psychologists with stronger ethical values as we take everything we have just learned to heart